everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East. Thanks to some stunning new reporting in the Washington Post, we now know that Rudy Giuliani was identified by U.S. intelligence agencies as a target of an active Russian intelligence operation to harm the candidacy of Joe Biden. That's according to new reporting in the Post out today. Rudy basically functioning as a Russian asset by pushing Russian disinformation. But the even bigger headline here, as is always the case when Russia is identified as attacking the United States with disinformation, is the president's reaction to warnings from his own intelligence community about this ongoing and live Russian aggression. When White House officials warned Trump that Giuliani's information was likely part of a Russian intelligence op, Trump reportedly shrugged it off, saying, quote, "That's Rudy." In the most chilling part of the Washington Post scoop, which NBC hasn't confirmed, the Post goes on to report, quote, "The intelligence raised concerns that Giuliani was being used to feed Russian misinformation to the president," former officials said. The warnings to the White House, which have not previously been reported, led National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien to caution Trump in a private conversation that any information Giuliani brought back from Ukraine should be considered contaminated by Russia. The message was, do what you want to do, but your friend Rudy has been worked by Russian assets in Ukraine. We should note that Rudy Giuliani, as well as the spokespeople at the CIA and the DNI, declined to comment to NBC News. But to put this in context, Robert Mueller's 22-month-long investigation on Trump-Russia ties found that Russia sought to aid Trump's last campaign in 2016 and that the Trump campaign welcomed that help. So this is a staggering upgrade to that arrangement with the president, who now sits atop the United States national security apparatus, using his closest legal and political advisor, who is literally being armed and, quote, contaminated, in the words of the intelligence community, with Russian disinformation to batter Joe Biden. To put it even more bluntly than that, Russia and Trump are both using Rudy to spread the same Russian disinformation about Joe Biden. Washington Post adds this reporting, quote, "Officials' warnings about Giuliani underscore the concern in the U.S. intelligence community that Russia not only is seeking to reprise the disinformation campaign it waged in 2016, but also may now be aided, unwittingly or otherwise, by individuals close to the president." Those warnings have gained fresh urgency in recent days. The information that Giuliani sought in Ukraine is similar to what is contained in emails and other correspondence published this week by the New York Post, which the paper said came from the laptop of Hunter Biden and were provided by Giuliani and Steve Bannon, Trump's former top political advisor. Trump has already laundered this contaminated information and disseminated it on the campaign trail. That comes as law enforcement is actively investigating whether the alleged Hunter Biden emails are linked to any foreign intel ops. No one has yet verified the content of that laptop, but it hasn't slowed Trump from using it as his ailing presidential campaign's closing act. Russian disinformation in the hands of the U.S. president with a potential chain of custody from the Russians to Rudy and out of the president's mouth is where we start. Former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintel, Frank Figliuzzi, is here. Along with us, former U.S. Attorney and Senior FBI official Chuck Rosenberg, Jason Johnson, Journalism and Politics Professor at Morgan State University and a contributor to the Griot's Back, and Washington Post White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker's here. Lucky for us, all MSNBC analysts. If you could take me through, Frank Figliuzzi, what would happen if Donald Trump wasn't the president, if this wasn't complicated by his now years-long affinity for Russia and Russian disinformation?
That's a great question, because essentially what you're saying is, let's break this down to its simplest components. What would we call it if this were not the president, but it were some corporate executive or some citizen? And look, here's what we've got. We've got a person named Donald Trump, who has been warned that he is receiving and is now regurgitating, repeating, and disseminating disinformation that he knows to be fabricated and supplied by a foreign intelligence service. And despite the warning, he's still doing it. that would be an investigation in the FBI. That person would be in the subject line of the FBI, and there could be criminal as well as counterintelligence repercussions for that individual. And I can tell you this, we can play games with what to call this person, Donald Trump, who's knowingly doing this, but I can tell you what the Russian intelligence services call that kind of person. They call him an asset. And that's essentially what we're looking at. When he knows it, when he doesn't stop, and when he promotes it, he's knowingly aiding and abetting the adversary in spreading propaganda and disinformation, and he's not going to stop until he is stopped, perhaps by the voters.
Let me ask you, Frank Figliuzzi, how the operation works from the Russian side. So they keep pushing the envelope because they're our adversary, and that's what you do. You keep pushing. But do you think that at its inception, this disinformation campaign had Rudy walking into the Oval, telling Trump what he's got and having Trump spew it out on the campaign trail? I mean, do you think that is what the Russians imagined?
No, I think in their wildest dreams inside the Kremlin, they could not have imagined a scenario where the lawyer to the President of the United States is actually becoming a mouthpiece for the intelligence services. I think that's beyond anybody's dreams, and somebody is getting heavily rewarded and extra bonuses inside the Russian intelligence service for this. You can't make this stuff up, but it's happening, and it's the best case scenario. Look, let's not just talk about Donald Trump. The reporting from the Washington Post tells us also that Attorney General Barr knows this. The National Security Advisor knows this, and they continue to do it as well. This is a tainted administration. And this is beyond the wildest dreams of the Russian intelligence service.
So, Chuck Rosenberg, I ask those questions because I have, since the presidential transition, and really when Comey writes in his book about going in to brief Trump and the family and Reince Priebus and some of the other, Trump 10 chiefs of staff ago were sitting in the room, they didn't act upset that Russia had attacked America's election. And then when Bob Mueller, one of the great FBI leaders in American history, was appointed to get to the bottom of why Russia attacked America, in the same way a commission was appointed after 9/11 to understand how those attacks were pulled off and what was missed and what dots weren't connected. I never understood why not just Donald Trump, but Fox News and every Republican in the Congress was so disinterested in what Bob Mueller might find about a political 9/11. And then when the results were lied about by Barr, I really did wonder, why are they doing that? If the Mueller report didn't bring any charges against Trump, he can move on. And then I've wondered, as he's gone in and reversed all those cases, tried to erase Mueller's work, erasing the prosecutions and sentencing of Manafort, who was at the heart of the collusion, of Stone, who was the dirty trickster on the phone with WikiLeaks, of Flynn, who we still have never understood, who told Flynn to lie about his conversations with the Russians, where he said, we won't sanction you, we won't keep. I never understood why. I think that what Frank is saying is that they are now a part of, and again, the Post reporting only leaves it at unwittingly, or we don't know if they're doing it on purpose, but they are part of a Russian intelligence operation in this country. Is that right?
Seems to be, Nicole. The Washington Post article also describes something we already knew, that if you raise Russia and its election interference with the president, it is, as described in the Post article, a third rail, meaning that anything that undermines, in Trump's mind, the legitimacy of his win in 2016 is a third rail. And nobody wants to go there with him. They don't have the courage to stand up to him. There's a bigger problem, though, and Frank and you both illustrated it nicely. Let me just flip the camera around for a minute to try and explain the significance of it. Imagine that Vladimir Putin had a very, very close political ally, friend, lawyer, mentor, confidant, we'll call him Dmitry, and somehow the United States intelligence community was able to work Dmitry. They were able to plant information with him, and either wittingly or unwittingly, Dmitry fed it to Putin. And Putin spoke about it, acted about it, thought about it, talked about it with all of his, cabinet members, for lack of a better word, in the Kremlin. The U.S. intelligence community would think of that as an enormous victory. That would be a coup, not literally, but figuratively a coup, that we were able to, in one hop, plant information with the president of Russia in the Kremlin. And that's exactly what has happened with Rudy Giuliani. My God, I hope it's unwitting, because everything that man does seems to be unwitting. But if it's witting, that's even worse. But either way, Nicole, the Kremlin has a pipeline to the White House. Do you remember when John Bolton called Rudy Giuliani a hand grenade?
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that Vladimir Putin has pulled the pin on that grenade in the body, in the form of Rudy Giuliani, and rolled it into the Oval Office.
And Frank Figliuzzi, because it is Rudy Giuliani and because it is Donald Trump, there's a taped confession. Let me show you Giuliani telling Jake Tapper that there's nothing wrong with taking disinformation, information from Russia, and Donald Trump telling George Stephanopoulos we'd absolutely do it again. Let's watch.
There's nothing wrong with taking information from Russians.
There's nothing wrong with taking information.
Depends on where it came from. It depends on where it came from.
You would have accepted information from Russians against a client, against a candidate, if you were running in the presidential election?
I probably wouldn't. I wasn't asked. I would have advised, just out of excess of caution, don't do it.
The campaign this time around, if foreigners, if Russia, if China, if someone else offers you information on an opponent, should they accept it or should they call the FBI?
I think maybe you do both. I think you might want to listen. There's nothing wrong with listening. If somebody called from a country, Norway, we have information on your opponent. Oh, I think I'd want to hear it.
You want that kind of interference in our elections?
It's not an interference. They have information. I think I'd take it.
So, Frank, those are both many, many months old, I think years old at this point, but everyone listens, and the president and Rudy solicited this information. So it may be unwitting at this point in terms of what is provable, but they publicly invited it.
Nicole, this is feigned ignorance, right? Rudy's saying, hey, it's perfectly fine to take information from Russia. Trump's saying, hey, there's no, it's equivalent to taking information from Norway. I wouldn't call the FBI. It's feigned ignorance. It's the same as the president saying last night he doesn't know anything about QAnon. He knows this is Russian government related, and so does Rudy. And once you're on notice, you've got to do something about it. He knows it's Russian intel. It's not just another Russian giving him this information and disinformation. They're being played at the least. They're being played at the most. This is a witting operation. And there's more to this as well, because I've run into, in my career in counterintelligence, I've seen this before. I've seen people in power with huge egos, Nicole, and they look at you across that interview table and they go, I've got it. I've got this. I don't, thanks very much, FBI. But I know how to handle this. I'm savvy. I can weed out the intel versus the disinformation. I'm an international player. And you know, in each and every one of those cases that I've experienced, it doesn't end well for that person. No.
Well, and we should remind all of ourselves that the impeachment of Donald Trump had at its heart Russian disinformation, that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump and the people around them and their accomplices at the highest levels of the State Department used to smear dedicated, accomplished national security officials like Marie Yovanovitch and Fiona Hill. Here's Fiona Hill warning us not just about Russian disinformation, not just that we were all at risk of becoming Russia's useful idiots, but that Rudy Giuliani was, as Chuck just said, described by her as the grenade.
Ambassador Bolton had looked pained, basically indicated with body language that there was nothing much that we could do about it. And he then, in the course of that discussion, said that Rudy Giuliani was a hand grenade that was going to blow everyone up. He was clearly pushing forward issues and ideas that would, probably come back to haunt us. And in fact, I think that that's where we are today.
Chuck, it was haunting when she said it, but to read this report today, it was just a gut punch.
Oh, absolutely. Look, Fiona Hill and Marie Yovanovitch and Bill Taylor and all the folks we heard from, during the impeachment hearings were so thoughtful, were so dignified, and so clearly cared deeply about our country and the way we conduct ourselves in foreign policy. They knew about the threat. They knew the president didn't care about the threat. And that must have been so disturbing to them. It's hard to imagine how it felt, other than when I see what is happening to my own Department of Justice and FBI, I have that same sort of pit in my stomach. I thought Fiona Hill was marvelous. They warned us. It's continuing. Nothing has changed. All we now know from the Washington Post is that Rudy Giuliani is being directly used as part of a disinformation campaign. He doesn't seem to care. The president doesn't seem to care. I sure do hope the voters care, because as Frank Figliuzzi knows, and as he said, this is a very big deal.
Phil Rucker, let me bring you in on the politics of this. This matters, and we're starting here today because this isn't the end of the story. This is the beginning of a story that we're probably now going to have to cover for the next 22 days. There is, as your paper reported, an active Russian disinformation op. The White House was warned about it. Rudy Giuliani is the target of it, is the word that your newspaper used. You have 4 accomplished national security reporters bylined on this story with, I think, 4 to 8 references to sources in here. And they're up to a new operation. It involves emails. It involves a hard drive. Talk about how the press is approaching what is now known at the front end of the disinformation campaign as, quote, contaminated by your story.
Yeah, Nicole, it's a real challenge for journalism, for news organizations to try to figure out what information comes out of the mouth or the Twitter feed of the president of the United States is credible, and what may be foreign disinformation that's being spread by America's enemies abroad to try to influence this election so close to the end. We should keep in mind a couple pieces of context here. Rudy Giuliani, in addition to being the president's friend, lawyer, confidant, and former mayor of New York City, is his debate coach. The final debate between Trump and Biden is scheduled to be next week, and Giuliani has been helping prepare the president for these debates. And so we'll have to see if there's any new information that Giuliani may have acquired from these sources that he might pass along to the president to try to lob at Biden on the debate stage with tens of millions of American voters watching. That's a very real possibility. We should also see what the president's going to be saying about this on the rallies. We already saw him try to weaponize the New York Post story a few days ago on the campaign trail. 2.5 weeks in politics is a lifetime, as you know, and so a lot can happen here at the end. There's not a lot of time for journalists and for public officials and public servants to try to figure out what's real, what's not, what's credible, what's foreign misinformation. And we should also keep in mind that the voters aren't necessarily waiting until November 3rd to make up their minds. Millions of Americans are voting today, are going to be voting tomorrow, and every day between now and the election.
So, Jason Johnson, I don't know how to say this in a sensitive manner, so I'm just going to say it. Anyone with someone in their family who's battled addiction is happy for every day that that person is on this earth. So I'm not sitting here saying that Hunter Biden's life and business choices are not something that Phil Rucker and his colleagues have a right to look at. I'm just saying that America has an ability to understand that Vice President Biden does not live a lavish life. He does not have gold toilet bowls. And if the Russian op is to use Rudy to get Trump to say bad things about Hunter Biden, who is a recovered addict's business and professional and personal choices, that seems like sort of a last gasp of a desperate corrupt political operation.
Yeah, Nicole, and if you peel away and get this at the base level to how Americans would hear it, the story is preposterous, right? The story is preposterous. So we're supposed to believe that Hunter Biden, in a drunken stupor, dropped off his laptop in, I guess, apparently QAnon repair office, right? Because this person decides to not only dig into Hunter Biden's emails, but then call the FBI and Rudy Giuliani. None of this story makes sense, right? In the 90s, okay, maybe a politician drops off film to be developed and they see a picture of that person and their mistress, and maybe they tell the newspaper. But the idea that all of this occurred, it doesn't make any sense to anybody. It is so obviously a Russian operation. It is so obviously a story that was created by the Trump campaign in order to go back to this ridiculous notion that Hunter Biden's personal mistakes are somehow a reflection of the entire 47-year career of Joe Biden. It doesn't work. But what it reflects is that it's not just that Trump will lie. It's not just that people around his administration will lie. It's not just that they will sit back and promote misinformation and disinformation. It's that they are willingly doing so even with an election on the line. Of all the resources that Donald Trump could put on the table today, like, oh, I don't know, a second stimulus for people suffering through coronavirus, or infrastructure week, which we've been waiting for since 2016, his plan is to use Russians to attack his opponent's son. That shows how desperate and venal and disgusting these people really are when the lives of millions of Americans are at stake.
You know, it's a good political point, Phil Rucker. I mean, if Donald Trump wanted to bounce 5 points nationally with seniors and probably 2 to 5 in Florida, maybe even a couple in Pennsylvania, he could today issue a national mask mandate and say he's going to use the U.S. Marshals and the military to enforce it. His poll numbers would go up 5 points with seniors nationally, I swear. I mean, I don't understand why all of his desperate Hail Marys are so sinister. Why not try to do something to end the pandemic and reboot the economy?
Nicole, that's been the question from day one of this pandemic. Why not just do what all of the scientists say is necessary to help fix this problem in this country? Instead, the president's been in denial. His administration has been largely dysfunctional over these last several months, and he's been digging in on his conspiratorial thinking, on his aversion to the science and to the expertise within his own government. We saw it in the town hall last night when, he challenged Savannah Guthrie about, the consensus on mask usage, and saying he has heard from his doctor, Scott Atlas, that masks don't work as well as, of course, the scientific community says they do. It's really perplexing. And, some of the reporting over the last 24 hours suggests that it's perplexing also to the president's own advisors and to his campaign strategists, who are frankly stuck here with a candidate who will not get on a disciplined message and will not do the really easy things to try to rescue his own political standing.
Jason, try to button this up for us. This reporting in the Post reveals that an active and live Russian disinformation campaign designed to harm Joe Biden is targeting Rudy Giuliani. And we know that the things that Rudy Giuliani is peddling is coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. Where does that leave us? And are we wiser? Are we more immune from disinformation than we were 4 years ago? Where do you think that leaves us? I think we've got, 3 more Fridays to go before Election Day.
Well, Nicole, I think the fact that we're having this discussion means we are wiser than 4 years ago. 4 years ago, WikiLeaks was sending out uncurated information and everybody was just running through it like it was a buffet table at Golden Corral on a Sunday, right? Now we have learned to be much more skeptical about leaks and information and where that information may come from and whether or not it was delivered in good ways or whether or not we can trust the original source. I think that not just the press, but the American people are a lot more sophisticated now when it comes to this kind of information. And what's interesting is, for an administration led by a man who's always been so good at branding and picking out the pulse of the American people, for once he's behind. For once, he thinks Americans are a lot dumber than they are, because at this point, we don't trust anything that comes out of this administration. And that's why this is falling so flat, even though it's only 2 weeks before the election.
Frank and Chuck, thank you both for helping me understand this. Frank is sticking around. Chuck, Jason, and Phil, thank you for helping us start here. It's really important conversation. I'm grateful to all of you. When we come back, another new low for the president, repeatedly given an opportunity to disavow the conspiracy group QAnon. He gave him a boost instead. We'll look at the dangers of that disinformation that he's emboldening. Also last night, a stark contrast in leadership when it comes to the pandemic. The actual specifics Joe Biden offered versus the combative lies Trump was spewing. Plus, Obama White House photographer Pete Souza's here. He is the subject of a